3 in the morning is not merely a time on a clock, it is a psychological threshold. At that hour, the world is quiet enough for the inner world to speak without interruption. The mind, no longer distracted by conversation, work, or obligation, begins to wander into deeper territory. Many people wake at this hour with a sense of unease, as though something unseen is present. What is present is often their own unexamined life. The symbolic power of 3 in the morning lies in its stillness. It is the hour when the conscious mind loosens its grip and the unconscious draws near. Thoughts long postponed return with clarity. Questions avoided during the day rise with insistence. Regrets, desires, and fears move closer to the surface. This hour exposes what daylight allows us to hide. The darkness around us reflects the unknown within us. In that space, a person may feel vulnerable, but vulnerability is the doorway to truth. The silence is not empty, it is full of meaning. It invites confrontation with what has been neglected. When someone experiences a moment of cracking at 3 in the morning, it is rarely random. It is the result of accumulated tension between who they are and who they pretend to be. The hour acts as a mirror, revealing the distance between the outer persona and the inner reality. And once that distance is seen clearly, something must shift. When something cracks within a person, it is often the persona that fractures first. The persona is the face carefully shaped for the world, the version of the self designed to meet expectations and secure belonging. Over time, this outer identity can become so polished that it feels permanent. Yet beneath it, another reality waits. The crack does not appear without cause. It forms slowly, through the strain of living in ways that do not fully reflect one's inner truth. At 3 in the morning, when there is no audience to impress and no role to perform, the persona weakens. The silence removes the stage lights. In that dim hour, a person may suddenly recognize how much energy has been spent maintaining appearances. The realization can feel unsettling, even frightening. If the persona breaks, who remains? This question is not a threat, but an invitation. The fracture exposes the difference between adaptation and authenticity. It reveals how much of one's life has been organized around approval rather than alignment. The crack is not destruction, it is exposure. It allows the individual to see the cost of hiding parts of themselves for the sake of acceptance. The more tightly the persona has been held, the more dramatic the moment of breaking can feel. Yet what emerges through that opening is not weakness. It is the beginning of honesty. When the false outer shell loosens, the deeper self has space to breathe. This shift is subtle but powerful. It marks the transition from living as a reflection of others' expectations to living as a response to inner conviction. And once that awareness dawns, even quietly at 3 in the morning, life can no longer continue in the same unconscious way. When the outer shell begins to fracture, what rises to meet awareness is often the shadow. The shadow is not a monster hiding in darkness, but a collection of qualities, emotions, and impulses that were set aside in order to survive, belong, or appear acceptable. It contains anger that was labeled inappropriate, sensitivity that was called weakness, ambition that was discouraged, and grief that was never given space. For years, these elements wait quietly beneath the surface. They influence choices from behind the scenes, shaping reactions and relationships in subtle ways. At 3 in the morning, when distraction fades and the mind drifts inward, the shadow approaches consciousness. It does not arrive to condemn, but to be seen. Yet the first encounter can feel uncomfortable. A person may recognize patterns they once blamed on others. They may see how their strongest judgments reflect disowned parts of themselves. This recognition can feel like loss because it challenges the story they have told about who they are. Still, the shadow carries vitality. What has been rejected also holds energy. When acknowledged, it restores balance. The crack that occurs in the quiet hours often signals that the psyche is ready for integration. Avoiding the shadow requires constant effort. Facing it requires courage, but it also brings relief. The individual begins to understand that wholeness does not mean perfection. It means embracing complexity. By turning toward the shadow rather than fleeing from it, they reclaim parts of themselves that were once hidden. The universe seems to respond not because something magical has occurred, but because the individual has become more real. Authenticity alters perception, and altered perception changes experience. What once felt like chaos begins to reveal structure. The shadow once feared becomes a guide toward depth, maturity, and genuine strength. A psychological crisis is often misunderstood as failure, yet it can function as an initiation. When something breaks inside a person at 3 in the morning, it may feel like collapse. The old structure no longer holds. Certainty dissolves. Plans lose their clarity. But beneath the discomfort lies a necessary turning point. Growth rarely occurs while everything feels stable. It begins when the existing framework can no longer contain the truth that seeks expression. Crisis strips away illusion. It reveals where life has been built on compromise rather than conviction. In that quiet hour, the individual may feel alone, yet this solitude has purpose. Without distraction, the deeper questions emerge. What have I ignored? Where have I betrayed myself? What must change? These questions signal readiness for transformation. An initiation does not arrive with celebration. It arrives with tension. The mind resists what the soul requires. Yet the pressure continues until acknowledgement becomes unavoidable. The crack is not punishment. It is preparation. It creates space for a new orientation. Just as a seed must split before growth begins, the psyche must sometimes fracture before expansion occurs. This process is not dramatic to the outside world. No visible event may accompany it. Yet internally, the shift is profound. The individual begins to see that suffering can carry instruction. Instead of asking why this is happening, they begin to ask what it is asking of them. That change in perspective marks the threshold of maturity. The universe appears to respond when the individual accepts responsibility for their inner work, not because fate intervenes, but because clarity influences action. Choices become more deliberate, boundaries become firmer, relationships reorganize. What seemed like breakdown reveals itself as breakthrough. The crisis at 3 in the morning becomes the doorway through which a more integrated self begins to emerge. Silence and isolation are often feared, yet they are among the most powerful forces in self-revelation. At 3 in the morning, when conversation has ended and responsibilities pause, a person stands alone with their own mind. There is no immediate distraction to soften uncomfortable thoughts. In daylight, noise protects us. Schedules, messages, and constant interaction prevent us from listening too closely to ourselves. But in isolation, the inner voice grows clearer. The crack that forms in such an hour is not caused by weakness. It is caused by stillness. When external stimulation decreases, the psyche reorganizes its attention inward. Memories surface. Unfinished emotions return. Questions long postponed rise gently but firmly. Isolation removes the illusion that identity depends entirely on others. It confronts the individual with the simple fact of their own presence. This encounter can feel unsettling because it strips away validation. Without applause or criticism, who are you? Without comparison, what remains? These questions begin to shape awareness. Silence becomes a mirror rather than a void. In that mirror, patterns become visible. Reactions that once seemed justified reveal deeper roots. Longings once dismissed as impractical demand acknowledgement. Isolation offers no immediate comfort, but it offers truth. The crack inside them at 3 in the morning often happens precisely because there is no escape from reflection. Yet within this solitude lies a hidden strength. When a person learns to remain present with themselves without distraction, resilience grows. They discover that discomfort does not destroy them, it clarifies them. Silence teaches patience. It encourages observation instead of impulsive reaction. Gradually, the fear of being alone transforms into familiarity. The universe appears to respond when an individual becomes at home within their own depths, not through spectacle, but through subtle alignment. Clarity, born in isolation, influences every outward step. What began as a lonely hour becomes the foundation of inner steadiness. When the inner world shifts, the outer world often begins to rearrange in response. This does not occur through magic or sudden miracles, but through perception and action transformed by awareness. At 3 a.m, when something cracked within them, it altered the way they saw themselves, and when perception changes, behavior follows. A person who has confronted their own illusions no longer reacts in the same automatic patterns. They pause where they once rushed. They speak where they once remained silent. They withdraw where they once overextended. These subtle adjustments ripple outward. Relationships respond to new boundaries. Opportunities appear different because the individual evaluates them through a clearer lens. What once seemed attractive may now feel empty. What once seemed intimidating may now feel necessary. The universe appears to answer because the individual has begun to participate consciously in their own life. When inner conflict decreases, decision-making gains coherence. Actions align more closely with values. This alignment generates momentum. Others sense authenticity, even if they cannot name it. Conversations deepen. Encounters feel meaningful rather than accidental. It is not that fate has suddenly awakened, it is that awareness has. The crack at 3 a.m. dissolved a false narrative. Without that distortion, reality can be interpreted with greater precision. The world reflects back what the individual now embodies. Confidence replaces hesitation. Discernment replaces confusion. The external rearrangement is gradual, but unmistakable. Doors that were once pursued desperately may close, while unexpected pathways open with quiet ease. The universe hears the shift not through sound, but through congruence. When thoughts, emotions, and actions begin to align, life moves with less resistance. What follows is not perfection, but direction. And direction, grounded in inner clarity, creates a sense of partnership between the individual and the larger order of existence. Through suffering, a more integrated self begins to take shape. The crack that occurred at 3 a.m. was not the end of strength, but the beginning of honesty. Pain has a way of revealing where we are divided within ourselves. It exposes contradictions between belief and behavior, between desire and fear. For a time, the discomfort may feel overwhelming. The old identity no longer feels solid, yet the new one has not fully formed. This in-between space requires patience. It asks the individual to endure uncertainty without rushing back to familiar patterns. Suffering, when faced consciously, becomes instructive rather than destructive. It teaches humility because it shows the limits of control. It teaches compassion because one who has confronted their own fragility understands the struggles of others. Gradually, the scattered parts of the personality begin to gather. The anger that was denied is acknowledged. The grief that was postponed is felt. The dreams that were silenced are reconsidered. Integration does not mean erasing these elements. It means giving them rightful place within the whole. The individual becomes less rigid and more balanced. Instead of presenting only strength, they allow vulnerability. Instead of denying weakness, they recognize its role in growth. This process transforms suffering into substance. The pain that once felt meaningless begins to serve clarity. A person who has walked through inner fracture carries a quieter confidence. They are less dependent on approval and less threatened by criticism. Their sense of self no longer relies entirely on external validation. The universe appears to respond because the individual has become internally coherent. What cracked at 3 in the morning created space for wholeness, and from that wholeness emerges a steadier presence, capable of facing life without disguise. When an individual awakens inwardly, even in the quietest hour, there is a subtle alignment with a greater order that extends beyond personal struggle. The crack at 3 in the morning may have seemed private, almost invisible, yet it marked the moment when inner truth was no longer denied. This acceptance creates resonance. The human psyche is not isolated from the wider fabric of existence. Thoughts influence perception. Perception shapes action, and action weaves into the collective environment. When someone begins to live in accordance with their deeper reality, their presence carries coherence. They no longer move in constant contradiction. Their choices reflect understanding rather than impulse. This alignment generates a sense of direction that feels supported rather than forced. It is not that the universe rearranges itself dramatically. It is that the individual steps into rhythm with what already exists. There is less internal resistance and therefore less external friction. Decisions are guided by clarity instead of fear. Patience replaces urgency. Trust replaces constant doubt. The world responds differently because the individual participates differently. Encounters feel purposeful. Timing feels meaningful. Even setbacks are interpreted as guidance rather than punishment. This shift marks the final movement of integration. The person who once felt fragmented now senses connection. Not dependency, but relationship with life itself. The crack that once symbolized breaking becomes recognized as awakening. It was the sound of alignment beginning. And though no one else may have heard it, the larger order of existence registered the change through the steady presence of a human being who has chosen to live consciously. After the crack, after the confrontation, after the long silence of 3 in the morning, there comes a quieter phase that is often overlooked: the discipline of continuation. Insight alone does not transform a life. Real change begins in the days that follow, when ordinary routines resume and the world expects the familiar version of you. This is where many retreat, attempting to seal the fracture and return to comfort. Yet the true work is to live differently in small, consistent ways. The awakening must move from feeling into structure. It must influence habits, conversations, boundaries, and commitments. Without this steady integration, the night of clarity becomes only a memory. The individual who honors the crack understands that transformation is not dramatic, it is deliberate. They begin to observe themselves with honesty. When old patterns attempt to return, they notice rather than obey. When fear suggests shrinking back into the persona, they pause and choose alignment instead. This daily vigilance is not harshness. It is devotion to authenticity. Over time, the new orientation stabilizes. What once required courage becomes natural. The voice that emerged in the silence grows stronger through use. Others may not know the origin of this change, but they feel its consistency. There is less inner argument, less scattered energy. The person moves with grounded intention. The universe appears to cooperate because the individual has become reliable to their own truth. This final stage is not dramatic like the crack itself, yet it is equally significant. It ensures that the awakening at 3 in the morning was not an isolated event, but the beginning of a sustained and conscious way of living. The moment when something cracks inside a person at 3 in the morning marks not only an ending, but also a beginning, a threshold into a deeper understanding of self and existence. It is a subtle internal event, often unnoticed by anyone else, yet its effects ripple through the psyche and outward into life. In that quiet hour, the noise of performance and expectation fades, leaving the individual face to face with their inner reality. The fracture signals that the old ways of seeing, reacting, and controlling are no longer sufficient. It is a call to pay attention, to listen, and to respond with honesty. The universe in its vastness does not need loud declarations. It responds to alignment. When the individual begins to act from awareness rather than pretense, a resonance forms. This resonance is felt as clarity, decisiveness, and coherence. Opportunities and relationships shift accordingly, not through manipulation or external force, but because the internal realignment changes perception and action. What once seemed chaotic becomes organized, not by external design, but by the individual's own presence in reality. The crack is the point at which accumulated tension, suppressed emotion, and unacknowledged truths demand recognition. It can feel frightening, isolating, or disorienting, yet within it lies potential. By facing what emerges, the person begins to gather the scattered parts of themselves, integrating shadow, fear, longing, and insight. The result is not perfection, but wholeness. Life does not become free of difficulty, but the individual's relationship to it transforms. Decisions become grounded, responses measured, and engagement with others more authentic. The outer world reflects these changes subtly. Connections deepen, timing improves, and circumstances seem to support rather than resist. What was private, momentary, and silent, what cracked inside at 3 a.m, has initiated a process that unfolds steadily, shaping the trajectory of life. It is a reminder that inner events, though unseen, are not insignificant. They carry the power to redirect energy, clarify purpose, and create alignment with a broader order. The universe, vast and impartial, registers this internal shift simply because the individual has chosen to listen and respond to themselves. In this way, the quiet fracture becomes a pivot point, signaling both an awakening and the start of conscious, sustained transformation, a life lived in closer harmony with truth, depth, and authenticity. The crack that occurs at 3 a.m. is not only a moment of fracture, but also a signal of awakening to one's own inner landscape. In that stillness, when the world rests and distraction is absent, the psyche communicates most clearly. Thoughts and feelings that were deferred by the demands of daily life press forward. What surfaces is often uncomfortable: regret, unresolved tension, suppressed longing. But it is necessary. The breaking is not an accident. It is a response to accumulated misalignment between the outer life and inner truth. For a long time, the individual may have lived in a state of quiet denial, unaware of the compromises that have shaped their identity. The crack disrupts this unconscious pattern. It forces attention inward, revealing the gap between adaptation and authenticity. Initially, the experience can feel destabilizing. There is disorientation, perhaps even fear, because the familiar structures of self no longer seem reliable. Yet this is precisely the space in which transformation begins. Awareness of the fracture allows the individual to observe the neglected or hidden aspects of themselves without judgment. It is the starting point of integration. In this process, disowned emotions, dormant dreams, and aspects of the shadow are acknowledged. The psyche begins to reorganize, creating room for coherence and balance. This is a subtle shift. It is not dramatic in outward appearance, but profoundly consequential within. Over time, the individual learns to carry themselves differently. Actions, decisions, and relationships reflect a deeper alignment with inner reality. The universe, in turn, seems to respond, not because external forces change, but because perception and behavior now harmonize with what is true. The crack at 3 a.m. is a threshold. It marks the moment when avoidance no longer serves, and honesty must emerge. It signals that life cannot continue unconsciously without consequence. What was once silent now speaks, guiding attention, thought, and action toward authenticity. The individual begins to understand that inner rupture is not destruction, but an invitation to greater self-coherence. The experience also fosters patience and discernment as the person navigates between old patterns and new insights. In this ongoing process, transformation extends beyond the moment itself, influencing everyday living. Small, consistent acts of alignment build resilience, integrity, and presence. The world may remain unaware, yet the individual's life reflects a subtle but profound shift. The crack, once feared or misunderstood, becomes recognized as the genesis of awakening, the point at which inner truth insists on being heard, and the first step toward a life lived with greater authenticity, depth, and connection. At 3 in the morning, the crack inside a person is often a quiet, yet profound invitation to awareness. It is not dramatic outwardly, but internally, it signals that accumulated tension, suppressed emotion, and unacknowledged aspects of the self have reached a threshold. In this solitary hour, distractions vanish, and the inner world demands attention. What surfaces may be discomfort, grief, or unresolved longing, but it is necessary for transformation. The moment of rupture forces the individual to confront patterns, assumptions, and behaviors that no longer serve authenticity. It reveals the difference between the life constructed to meet external expectations and the life aligned with inner truth. Initially, the experience may feel destabilizing. The familiar structures of identity seem to dissolve, leaving uncertainty in their place. Yet within this instability lies potential. The fracture provides space for reflection, observation, and integration of disowned parts of the psyche. By attending to this inner dialogue, the person begins to recognize the shadow, the hidden feelings and desires previously denied. Slowly, the psyche reorganizes, allowing clarity, balance, and coherence to emerge. Integration after such a crack is subtle and gradual. It requires patience and commitment to self-honesty. Each choice, no matter how small, becomes an opportunity to align action with insight. Old habits that reinforce denial may resurface, but the individual now has the awareness to observe without automatic compliance. They begin to make decisions guided by internal truth rather than external pressure. Relationships adjust naturally as the person's presence becomes more authentic. The world does not necessarily change dramatically, but perception and engagement shift. Opportunities that were once unnoticed or dismissed may now appear relevant because the individual perceives them from a new standpoint. Even setbacks take on meaning, interpreted as guidance rather than punishment. This stage emphasizes consistency, not spectacle. The crack is a beginning, and transformation is maintained through deliberate daily attention to alignment and authenticity. Ultimately, what cracked at 3 in the morning becomes a turning point that ripples across inner and outer life. It signals readiness to live in greater integrity, to integrate shadow and light, and to respond consciously rather than react habitually. The universe responds subtly through resonance. The coherence within the individual influences perception, decision-making, and interactions. The quiet rupture transforms into an ongoing process of awakening, guiding the person toward depth, resilience, and a more harmonious presence in the world. The crack, though unseen by others, becomes the seed for conscious, sustained transformation, a reminder that true change begins within the stillness of awareness and unfolds across all facets of life.